Karma.
What comes around goes around is a saying that can be used in many facets of life. This also includes Formula 1. There have been plenty of occasions where drivers acted like dicks and were administered some karma. Some straight away, sometimes it was a dish served cold. I'm Wimbo, and today I'm getting help from Will from FP1Will. Take it away, Will. The crown. Number 5. Palmer versus Alonso.
At the 2017 Italian Grand Prix, Fernando Alonso and Jolyon Palmer were having a little bit of a scrap. Palmer pushed Alonso off the track, which didn't make the Spaniard particularly happy. Despite the Briton receiving a 5-second penalty for the incident, this still didn't please Fernando Alonso, who famously said,
5 seconds, it's a joke. A joke.
The karma.
Then, later in the race, Alonso must have noticed that Palmer wasn't around anymore, as Fernando's mind is admittedly always working in 3 different places at once, so he asked about it on the team radio. When Fernando heard that Palmer had retired the car, Alonso came out with one of the most legendary radios of all time.
Where is Palmer?
And Fernando Palmer has retired.
Karma.
4. Daniel Ricciardo versus Lando Norris. The crime. Daniel Ricciardo left Red Bull in 2018 to join Renault. This was particularly controversial as Christian Horner was crossing swords with Renault team principal Cyril Abiteboul in those days. A bit like he's doing with Toto Wolff most of the time now. To everyone's surprise, Daniel Ricciardo left Renault after 2 decent seasons to join McLaren. This is where he overstepped the mark and was put back in his place by the thing called karma. Just before joining McLaren, during some joking around with his soon-to-be teammate Lando Norris, Danny Rick said in front of the F1 TV crew, "I'm going to end you." So, his first crime was perhaps leaving Renault, who really tried to get him a car that suited his way of driving, and the second crime was saying, even for a joke, that he was going to end Lando's career. The karma. Daniel Ricciardo had the worst time you could possibly imagine at McLaren. The package he had to drive was miles off from what he preferred, and try what he might, he could not gel with that car at all. In 2021, he did win a race with McLaren, which gave him hope I suppose, but in his second year, things got worse. The once cocky and cheerful Australian had turned into a desperate ghost of what he once was. No confidence at all, and there didn't seem to be a way out. Well, there was a way out for McLaren, and it was announced that even though he had a contract with McLaren for the following year, his services were no longer needed. McLaren had decided to take fellow Australian Oscar Piastri out of the position of third driver at Alpine to partner up with Lando Norris. This caused some uproar as well, as Alpine had just lost Alonso to Aston Martin and announced Piastri, to which Piastri replied with an iconic tweet. So, as it turned out, Daniel Ricciardo's career got ended at McLaren instead of him ending Norris's career. Luckily, Red Bull handed out a lifeline, which has turned into a seat at AlphaTauri now, the place where it all started for Ricciardo. You could say he went full circle, just like karma does. Number 3. Speed versus Vettel. The crime.
American F1 driver Scott Speed can't be compared to the American driver we have on the grid now. Logan Sargent is calm and modest and actually drives alright, most of the time, whereas Scott Speed was a bit of a loudmouth. Now don't get me wrong, it's nice to see some sassiness from drivers and beats the generic robotic answers we get from #blessed these days. But Scott Speed overestimated his skills and he paid the price for it. In a season riddled with reliability problems, Scott Speed scored no points at all. After crashing at the European Grand Prix in Germany, he and Franz Tost had an altercation that became physical. Soon enough, he had lost his seat to junior driver Sebastian Vettel. Vettel was the reserve driver and had already scored a point when he filled in for Robert Kubica at Sauber earlier in the year. Speed claimed that Vettel was nothing special and received the golden child treatment. Right.
The karma.
The inevitable karma was served later when Vettel actually won a race in that bad Toro Rosso package, driving in a wet Italian Grand Prix in 2008. This golden child, as Speed put it, managed 4 titles with Red Bull and then became a legend of the sport. Scott Speed had a long motorsport career in NASCAR and became a multiple world champion in rallycross. He says, looking back at the F1 days, that he was a little bit too cocky and that his experiences after Formula 1 have humbled him. Yeah, fair enough, mate. Now I'll hand back to Wimbo for the final 2 on this list, mainly because I don't want to touch them. You have fun with the comment section, mate.
2. Prost versus Senna. The crime. Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna couldn't be further apart in their approach than what they were as teammates at McLaren in 1989. Senna was the passionate, romantic, relentless racing driver that wanted to go full throttle all the time, and Alain Prost was the calculated, disciplined, almost surgical professor of Formula 1. It was no surprise that they clashed so often and so hard. What also didn't help was the dynamics of the racetrack, with Prost being French and the president of the FIA also being French. F1 fans nowadays love to shout that things are getting manipulated, but in those days it looked very plausible that some meddling was going on to give Prost a helping hand. At the Japanese GP in Suzuka, Prost had more points, only a win could give Senna the title. Senna had smashed the qualifying by driving 1.7 seconds faster than Prost, but was disgruntled that the pole position was on the dirty side of the track. Senna was in the lead after the initial start, but Prost got away better on the clean side, and Prost had removed a small wing to have more top speed, and passed Senna and stayed ahead for over half the race. So he went after Prost, who closed the door, they touched and went off. Prost gave up, but Senna received a helping hand and went on his way. He was later disqualified for cutting the chicane by French FIA President Balestre. Senna was almost banned for 6 months after the row that followed after the race. The karma. 1 year later, the two were at it again. This time not as teammates, but as rivals from different teams. Prost had left McLaren for Ferrari. The scene of this epic battle was Suzuka again. Senna had a lead in the standings, and Prost needed to win to become champion once again. Prost had a better start, and Senna went for a gap, because if you don't, you're no longer a racing driver, and the pair collided, causing both drivers to retire and making Senna world champion. Nothing the FIA or anybody could do about that. Prost had to say au revoir to his 4th title, and Senna got what he should have had a year earlier, although I think this tasted even better. 1. Lewis Hamilton versus Verstappen. The crime. Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen were in one of the greatest battles that Formula 1 has ever seen in the year 2021. Both their cars were pretty evenly matched throughout the season, and the difference in speed were only marginal. A lot of politics between Mercedes and Red Bull went on, which was highlighted by the knowledge that Netflix TV show Drive to Survive was watching everything closely, and the radio traffic between teams and race control were broadcast. After Monaco 2021, Verstappen took the lead in the standings, and that lead grew and grew. Then we went to Silverstone, the home ground of 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton, a race that he had won many times. It was a sprint race that weekend, and Max Verstappen had already won the sprint, giving him pole position. Hamilton later admitted that he needed to be in front of Verstappen no matter what, or he'd lose the race. What followed was one of the most thrilling half a laps ever. Verstappen led the race with Hamilton on his tail the whole time, until they reached Cobb's Corner, one of the fastest corners in the season. Verstappen positioned himself somewhere in the middle of the track, leaving enough space on the inside for Hamilton, who tried the inside line after a dummy move. Hamilton didn't make the apex, hit Verstappen's right wheel with his front wheel, and sent Verstappen flying into the barriers. The impact was 51 G and would have been lethal a decade ago. A red flag was called to fix the barriers, and Verstappen could walk himself to the ambulance. He had a concussion and needed checkups in the hospital. Hamilton was able to get his car fixed under the red flag, and after a 10-second penalty won the race. And that's where he committed the crime. After knowing that he crashed out his young opponent, he celebrated like he had won the championship, running around with a flag to the middle of the track, the camera following him, making a huge in-your-face spectacle out of it. It was a statement to young Max Verstappen, to intimidate him, to throw him off. The karma. As always, justice was served when it needed to be served. Max Verstappen was unfazed by it all, and even after losing more points to bowling Bottas in Hungary, he carried on with putting in top performances, winning races pretty much on his own that he wasn't meant to win. At the end of the season, Mercedes had figured out they could run their engines at maximum capacity for only a few races, and this gave Hamilton a spicy rocket engine for the last 4 races. Hamilton didn't fail and kept winning even if Verstappen threw everything at him to stop that faster car. The last race in Abu Dhabi saw them both equal on points with Verstappen on pole. Hamilton passed Verstappen, who tried to get back but failed because Hamilton cut the corner and allegedly gave the advantage back. The whole race Verstappen didn't have the pace to attack Hamilton, but some hard defending by Checo Perez and a strategic pit stop from Red Bull never gave Mercedes the opportunity to pit Hamilton, who had swapped his mediums for hards, right after Verstappen swapped his softs for hards. The race looked lost for Verstappen until Nicholas Latifi crashed and a safety car was deployed. Now, with a spoken agreement in place for race control to try to finish that last most important race in years, to finish under green conditions, Michael Masi listened to Jonathan Wheatley's plan to not let every car on lap, as that would have taken too long, and called a safety car in before it did its extra lap. What followed was an exhilarating last lap where Max Verstappen passed Hamilton in turn 5. Max Verstappen stayed in the lead even with a cramp in his calf and drove himself to his first championship, leaving Hamilton stunned in his car for ages, just like Verstappen was stunned in his car at Silverstone. To me, this was the most beautiful case of karma in F1 and maybe even in all sporting history. Subscribe. Take care now. Doei doei.